The first knock came like thunder against the cabin's old cedar door, startling me awake from the light doze I had fallen into after tending the fire. My wife was still upstairs unpacking boxes, our new retreat finally settling into the peace we'd dreamed of. Then came a second knock, sharper, faster, almost a pounding. I rose and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. There she was, Karen, the so-called HOA president, her obese frame wrapped in a garish floral robe, clipboard clutched under one arm, smirk plastered across her face like she was the sheriff of the frontier. Only she wasn't. This was our private land, our cabin, our sanctuary. And yet she stood on the porch as if it belonged to her. "Open up," she shrieked, her voice slicing through the crisp mountain morning. "This cabin is subject to immediate inspection for compliance with HOA regulations. I have the right to enter." Her words felt surreal, like a bad parody of authority. I swung the door open a crack and glared at her. "This cabin is on my deeded property. You have no jurisdiction here. Leave." But Karen only puffed up bigger, jabbing the clipboard toward me. "Noncompliance has consequences. I've received reports of illegal modifications, and I will enter whether you like it or not." Something inside me snapped. For months, we'd heard whispers about Karen, how she fined neighbors for wind chimes, trespassed into backyards with a tape measure, and bullied anyone who stood in her way. But this was more than petty power games. This was trespass. My voice rose, shaking with anger. "You set one foot inside, Karen, and you'll regret it." She smirked, smug and self-righteous. "Empty threats. Men like you always bark, but never bite." Before I could retort, footsteps sounded on the stairs. My wife, Elena, appeared, her dark hair tied back, her posture straight, her eyes sharp as glass. She had served years as a federal investigator, but Karen didn't know that yet. Elena stepped forward calmly, pulling a slim folder from her bag. She opened it, and the gold seal gleamed in the morning light. Karen's eyes flickered with confusion as Elena held it up and said in a voice that carried the weight of command, "You want inspection authority? Here's mine. Federal warrant. This property and its owners are under federal protection pending investigation of local HOA misconduct." The words dropped like stones in the silence. Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. Neighbors had already started to gather, drawn by the commotion. They gasped, some whispering, some recording. For the first time, Karen's confidence faltered. "What is this? That's not, you can't just," she sputtered. Elena stepped closer, her voice cold and precise. "You've been trespassing, harassing, and impersonating authority. Do you know the penalty for interfering with a federal inquiry? Because I do, and you're one knock away from finding out in handcuffs." Karen stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own shoes, but she tried one last desperate jab. "You're bluffing. The HOA is the law here. Everyone knows it." Elena didn't flinch. She tapped the seal again and said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "The only law here is the United States Code. And by that law, you are trespassing on private property. Step off this porch." The neighbors erupted, some cheering, some laughing in disbelief, others calling out, "She's done for." The twist came when Mr. Nolan, the quiet old man who lived down the road, stepped out of the crowd. He raised his voice, trembling but strong. "She trespassed on my land last month. I have video. She cut across my property and threatened me with fines I never owed." He held up his phone, screen glowing with footage of Karen berating him on his porch. Gasps filled the air as more neighbors began shouting their own stories: unpaid fines, bogus violations, threats of liens. It was like a dam had burst, every hidden grievance flooding out into the open. Karen's face went pale. She tried to retreat, waving her clipboard like a shield. "They're all lying. This is a conspiracy against me." But Elena didn't let her escape. She snapped a photo of Karen standing on the porch, clipboard in hand, and spoke into her phone. Documenting evidence. Subject caught trespassing during inspection attempt. Karen froze, eyes wide, realizing too late that the power she wielded for so long had just been stripped away, recorded, and sealed with authority she could never match. As the sheriff's cruiser rolled up minutes later, summoned by one of the neighbors, the scene was already set. Karen stood trembling, cornered by truth, her arrogance shredded by the warrant she had mocked. The deputies stepped out, listened to the crowd, looked at Elena's credentials, and without hesitation cuffed Karen on the spot. The clipboard clattered to the ground, useless now, as the neighbors erupted in cheers. And I stood there, arm around my grandpa's shoulders, Elena's warrant gleaming in her hand, watching Karen shoved into the back of the cruiser. For the first time in months, the mountain air tasted clean. The sight of Karen being shoved into the back of the cruiser should have been enough, but the story was far from over. The sheriff's deputies promised us that night that charges would follow, and within 48 hours, the headlines confirmed it. HOA president arrested for trespass and fraud. Federal warrant halts HOA tyrant at mountain cabin. The video neighbors had filmed spread like wildfire, Karen pounding on my door, waving her clipboard, then freezing as Elena calmly revealed the federal seal. Millions of people watched Karen's face crumple into panic in real time. She had spent years building her image as untouchable, but one warrant and one moment of truth stripped it all away. The investigation moved fast. Elena's federal inquiry wasn't just theater, it was a documented operation against HOAs in the region suspected of abuse and fraud. Karen's chapter wasn't the first to draw attention, but it became the loudest. Financial records revealed that she had funneled thousands of dollars in compliance fines into her personal account. She had fabricated violations, created fake inspection forms, even drafted counterfeit legal letters to scare people into paying. And she wasn't acting alone. Two other board members resigned the moment the subpoenas hit, their signatures scrawled across the fraudulent notices that neighbors dug out of old files. The trial was scheduled within months, and by then the entire community had transformed. The fear Karen once inspired had flipped into outrage. Neighbors who had once whispered now spoke loudly, their stories piling onto one another like bricks in a wall against her. One man testified that she had threatened to tow his truck for parking in his own driveway. A single mother explained how she'd been forced to sell her porch swing after Karen claimed it was unauthorized clutter. A retired veteran recounted how Karen had fined him for flying his flag too high on his own pole. Each testimony struck like a hammer, driving home the truth. This wasn't leadership, it was exploitation. Karen walked into the courtroom bloated with denial, her once arrogant stride broken into a stiff shuffle in a faded suit. She still tried to play the victim, claiming she had been enforcing bylaws and protecting property values. But the evidence spoke louder than her excuses. The videos, the false documents, the bank transfers, it was a paper trail she could never outrun. And then came the testimony that sealed her fate. Elena took the stand in full professional composure, credentials displayed, voice unwavering. She laid out the investigation with surgical precision, the fraud, the impersonations, the harassment. She explained how Karen's so-called inspections had no legal basis, how the bylaws she cited were outdated or fabricated, and how the HOA funds had been siphoned into her personal accounts. And finally, she raised the warrant again for the court to see. This is the authority Karen challenged that morning, she said. This is the authority she mocked. And this is the authority that will hold her accountable. The room was silent. Karen's eyes darted wildly, her lips trembling. She tried to interrupt, shouting, "She planted that evidence. They're all against me." But the judge cut her off with a sharp gavel strike. Enough. You had your chance to speak. The evidence is clear. When the verdict came, it hit like a tidal wave. Guilty on all counts: fraud, trespass, harassment, misuse of funds, and obstruction. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in state prison, restitution for every neighbor she had extorted, and a lifetime ban from serving in any position of neighborhood authority. The gasp that swept through the courtroom turned quickly into cheers. Some neighbors cried openly. Others hugged. A few simply sat in stunned relief. Karen collapsed into her chair, sobbing, no longer the queen of power but just another fraud exposed under the weight of truth. Deputies lifted her by the arms, her protests muffled into the courtroom walls, and marched her out as cameras flashed. Her reign was over, but the story didn't end with her downfall. The true ending came in what the neighborhood became afterward. The HOA stripped of its corrupted board, dissolved under court order. In its place, the residents voted to create a community council open to all, accountable, and volunteer-run. Instead of fines, we built support. Instead of threats, we built trust. The first gathering was held at our cabin. Grandpa, cane in hand, sat in a rocking chair on the porch, watching with a proud grin as kids ran around and neighbors laughed together. Elena spoke briefly, reminding everyone that vigilance matters, that communities fall not when power is absent, but when it is abused. We all let Karen take too much for too long, she said. But when we finally stood together, we proved something important. No one person, no matter how loud, can silence a community united in truth. To commemorate the moment, the neighbors unveiled a wooden sign they had carved together. They planted it at the start of the trail that led to our cabins. Burned into the wood were simple words: "Respect lives here." Grandpa touched the carving, his eyes misting over, and whispered, "This is the country I fought for." The community thrived in the months that followed. Where there had been fear, there was now laughter. Where there had been silence, there was now music, barbecues, children's voices. And every time I looked at Elena, I remembered that morning when she stepped forward, calm and unshakable, and shut Karen down with a single warrant. She had shown us all that authority isn't in the loudest voice or the heaviest fist. It's in truth, in justice, in the courage to stand firm. Karen's name became a punchline, a cautionary tale told at block parties and around campfires. Remember when she tried to kick in doors? Someone would laugh, and the whole group would shake their heads. But beneath the humor was something deeper, a reminder of how close we had come to losing our freedom, and how quickly it can be taken when no one fights back. So now I ask you, the reader, when someone like Karen abuses power and crosses the line from rules into tyranny, where does true justice lie? Is it in the sentence she received, or in the way a community rose stronger and freer in her absence? Right or wrong, I know this. The morning she demanded to inspect our cabin, she thought she held the key. But the truth is, the only key that matters is the one that unlocks courage, and we found it together.